Hello friends, this is Sonu Yadav and welcomes you on your YouTube channel. Let's compete with the second part of the video, Indian Navy. Friends, first part of the video can be seen with the link given at the end of the video, namely Indian Navy. Well friends, before proceeding, I request you to like the video and subscribe the channel. Let's proceed. The origins of the current Indian Navy dated to 1612 when an English vessel under the command of Captain Thomas Best defeated the Portuguese at the Battle of Swali. Although the Portuguese were defeated, this incident, along with the trouble caused by the pirates at the merchant vessels, forced the British to maintain fleet near Surat. Gujarat East India Company formed a naval arm and the first squadron of fleet ships reached the Gujarat coast on 5 September 1612. Their objective was to protect British merchant ships off the Gulf of Cambay and up the Narmada and Tapti rivers. As the HEIC continued to expand its rule and influence over different parts of India, the responsibility of company marine increased too. Over time, the British predominantly operated from Bombay, and in 1686, HEIC's naval arm was renamed the Bombay Marine. At times, the Bombay Marine engaged Dutch, French, Maratha, and Sindhi vessels. Much later, it was also involved in the First Anglo-Burmese War of 1824. Friends, now we go with the East India Company to independence in the case of Royal Indian Navy. In 1834, the Bombay Marine became Her Majesty's Indian Navy. The Navy saw action in First Opium War of 1840 and in the Second Anglo-Burmese War in 1852. Due to some unrecorded reasons, the Navy's name reverted to Bombay Marine from 1863 to 1877, after which it was named Her Majesty's Indian Marine. At that time, the Marine operated in two divisions, the Eastern Division at Calcutta under the Superintendent of Bay of Bengal and the Western Division at Bombay Superintendent of Arabian Sea. In 1892, the Marine was renamed the Royal Indian Marine, and by the end of 19th century it operated over 50 ships. The Marine participated in World War I with a fleet of patrol vessels, troop carriers and minesweepers. In 1928, D.N. Mukherjee was the first Indian to be granted a commission in the rank of an engineer sub-lieutenant. Also in 1928, the RIM was accorded combatant status which entitled it to be considered a true fighting force and to fly the white ensign of the Indian Royal Navy. In 1934, the Marine was upgraded to a full naval force, thus becoming the Royal Indian Navy, and was presented the King's Colours in recognition of its services to the British Crown. During the early stages of World War II, the tiny Royal Indian Navy consisted of 5 sloops, 2 survey vessels, 1 depot ship, 1 patrol vessel, and numerous assorted small crafts. Personal strength was at only 114 officers and 732 sailors. The onset of war led to an expansion in number of vessels and personnel. By June 1940, the Navy had doubled its numbers in terms of both personnel and material and expanded nearly 6 times of its pre-war strength by 1942. The Navy was actively involved in operations during the war around the world and was heavily involved in operations around the Indian Ocean, including convoy escorts, minesweeping, and supply, as well as supporting amphibious assaults. When hostilities ceased in August 1945, the Royal Indian Navy had expanded to a personnel strength of over 25,000 officers and sailors. Its fleet comprised 7 sloops, 4 frigates, 4 corvettes, 14 minesweepers, 16 trawlers, 2 depot ships, 30 auxiliary vessels, 150 landing craft, 200 harbor craft, and several offensive and defensive motor launches. During World War II, the Navy suffered 275 casualties, 27 officers, 2 warrant officers, and 123 rating killed in action, 2 rating missing in action, and a further 14 officers, 2 warrant officers, and 123 ratings founded. For their role in the war, the officers and ratings of the Navy received the following honors and decorations: a KB military, a knighthood, a CB military, 10 CIEs, 2 DSOs, a CBE, 15 DSCs, and OBE, 28 DSMs, 8 OBIs, 2 IOMs, 16 BEMs, 10 Indian Defence Service medals, a Royal Human Society medal, 105 mention in dispatch, and 118 assorted commendations. Immediately after the war, the Navy underwent rapid large-scale demobilization of vessels and personnel. From the inception of Indian naval forces, some senior Indian politicians had voiced concerns about the degree of Indianization of the Navy and its subordination to the Royal Navy in all important aspects. On the eve of World War II, the Royal Indian Navy had no Indian senior line officer and a single Indian senior engineer officer only. Even by the war's end, the Navy remained a predominantly British officer service. In 1945, no Indian officer held a rank above engineer commander, and only a few Indian officers in the executive branch held substantive senior line officer rank. The situation, coupled with the inadequate levels of training and discipline, poor communication between officers and ratings, instances of racial discrimination, and the ongoing trials of ex-Indian National Army personnel, it ignited the Royal Indian Navy mutiny by Indian ratings in 1946. A total of 78 ships, 20 shore establishments, and 20,000 sailors were involved in the strike, which spread over much of India. After the strike began, the sailors received encouragement and support from the Communist Party in India. Unrest spread from the naval ships and led to students and workers' hartal in Bombay. The strike ultimately failed as the sailors did not receive substantial support from either the Indian Army or from political leaders in the Congress or the Muslim League. On 21 July 1947, HMS Chaudhary and Bhaskar Sadasi Som, both of whom would eventually command the Pakistani and Indian Navy, respectively, became the first Indian Royal Indian Navy officers to attain the acting rank of captain. Following the independence and the partition of India in 15 August 1947, the Royal Indian Navy depleted fleet of ships and remaining persons were divided between the newly independent Dominion of India and Dominion of Pakistan. 21% of Indian Navy officers cadre and 47% of its sailors opted to join the portion of fleet which became the Royal Pakistan Navy. The Indian share of Navy consisted of 32 vessels along with 11,000 personnel. Effective from the same date, all British officers were compulsory retired from the Navy and its reserves components, with Indian officers being promoted to replace British senior officers. However, a number of British flag and senior officers were invited to continue serving in the Royal Indian Navy. Only 9 of the Navy's Indian commissioned officers had more than 10 years service, with the majority of them only having served from 5 to 8 years. Rear Admiral John Talbot Savignac Hall headed the Navy as its first commander-in-chief. Post-independence in January 1948, D.N. Mukherjee, the first Indian officer in the Royal Indian Navy, became the first Indian to be promoted to acting engineer captain. In May 1948, Captain Ajitendu Chakravarti became the first Indian officer to be appointed to the rank of Commodore. When India became a republic on 26 January 1915, the royal prefix was dropped and the name Indian Navy was officially adopted. The prefix for naval vessels was changed from His Majesty Indian ships to Indian naval ships. At the same time, the imperial crown in insignia was replaced with the lion capital of Ashoka, and Union Jack in the canton of the white ensign was replaced with the Indian tricolor. By 1955, the Navy had largely overcome its post-independence personnel shortfalls. During the early years following independence, many British officers continued to serve in the Navy on secondment from the Royal Navy due to the post-independence retirement or transfer of many experienced officers to the Royal or Pakistani Navy. The first commander-in-chief of the Navy was Admiral Sir Edward Perry, who took over from Hall in 1948 and then handed over to Admiral Sir Charles Thomas Mark PJ in 1951. Admiral PJ also became the first chief of the naval staff in 1955 and was succeeded by Vice Admiral Sir Stephen Hope Carroll the same year. The peace of Indianizing continued steadily through the 1950s. Then by 1952, senior naval appointments had begun to be filled by Indian officers, and by 1955, basic training for naval cadets was entirely conducted in India. In 1956, Ramdas Katari became the first Indian flag officer and was appointed the first Indian Commodore of the fleet on 2 October. On 22 April 1958, Vice Admiral Katari assumed the command of Indian Navy from Kerala as the first Indian Chief of Staff of the Indian Navy, with the departure in 1962 of the last British officer on secondment to the Navy Commodore David Kirke, the Chief of Naval Aviation. The Indian Navy finally became an entirely Indian service. Friends, there is a lot to say, to tell, but the video is too long. Now, I conclude this video with the request to subscribe the channel and like the video, please. And the rest will be told you in the next episode. Thank you and namaste, friends.